Hey everyone, welcome. It is Caleb. This video is all about list comprehension in Python. Now, if you're new to list comprehension or just learning, it can be confusing. It's a new syntax, but once you got it figured out, you're going to put the old way of doing things behind you and never to go back there again. So trust me, get this stuff figured out and you'll be grateful. It makes doing a lot of interesting things very easy inside of Python. They also have set comprehension and dictionary comprehension, which we're going to talk about in this video as well. So let's switch over to the editor, and what we're going to do is we're going to start with just a basic example of list comprehension and start building up to more complex examples. So first, what I want to do is I want to start with a list of data, and let's just say we have the values 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I challenge you to create a new list of data, and the values inside of here are going to be 1, 4, 9, and 16. Well, you might be able to figure out that these are just the squares of each of these values. 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, and 4 times 4 is 16. Go ahead and see if you can figure that out. Well, the way you do this without list comprehension is you create new data and you have it an empty list. We'll just erase this one up here for now. And what you can do is you can say for d in data and add that to the new data with the append method and say d times d. At the end of the program, we will just print new data. So let's run this, see if we get the result we expected, and we get 1, 4, 9, 16. So we haven't done any list comprehension yet, but we were able to get the same result. The purpose of list comprehension is to simplify the syntax, which if you're new, the syntax can be confusing, but overall the syntax is simpler. There's less to type, and it's a better way of doing things. So think of it as a syntactical sugar. You may have heard that before, basically a prettier way of doing things. So what we're going to do is we're going to say new data and assign it a list. And inside of here, we're going to say the element we want, which is d times d, just like right here. And then we're going to say where that comes from for d in data, which is the same as this line right here. And that's all there is to it. That's list comprehension. This is going to give us the same exact result. And we can print new data down here, confirm that we do in fact get the same result. So that's the first use case of list comprehension. Whenever you want to run a function on each element in a list, you can use list comprehension to do that easily. In this case, we're just multiplying it by itself, but you could also use a function such as square root and pass in d, and for this we'll just import math like this, and now we get the square root of these values, square root of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's the very first thing you can do with list comprehension. Again, if you want to process each element in a list through some function, list comprehension. The second thing is going to be a very similar example. We are going to reverse a bunch of strings in a list. So let's go ahead, start fresh. We'll say names and assign this a list. Just put a few names in here. There we go. And we will say backwards is a new list. We're going to take the name and you can reverse it with square brackets, colon, colon, -1, which is a little trick to flip a string. But where does name come from? As you can see, it's not currently defined. You're going to say for name in names. So this is the same exact thing as the previous example, but the function that we were talking about is really just flipping the value, and we're working on strings. So let's go ahead and print backwards, run this, and you can see we got Balak, Adnama, and Urej. The next example I want to go through is if you want to filter through a list and only include certain elements that meet some requirement, you can do that with list comprehension. So let's go ahead, replace this with a new list. We'll call it data. And we're just going to fill this with a bunch of numbers. So just pick a bunch of numbers, doesn't really matter what they are. All right, there we go. Now what I want is new data to be all of the numbers in this list that are even. So going through this, you'll notice 34, 34, 72, 78, 12, 54, 34, and yeah, you get the point. So how would you do this? Well, we're going to start with loops, and then we're going to switch over to list comprehension. You would say for d in data, if d, and you can check if it's even with the modulus operator, so modulus 2, If there is no remainder when you divide it by 2, then you know it is even. And if that's the case, we're going to append it to new data. So new data.append, pass in D. Then at the end, we're going to print new data. Give this a run, and you see we got 34, 34, 72, 78, and so forth. So it appears to be working. The list comprehension way to do this would be, as we've normally done, we take what we want, the element, so in this case, we called it D. Then we specify where that comes from for D in data, but we can also have a condition, such as this one right here. We'll take that and place this right after data. If D modulus 2 is 0. We'll go ahead and print new data, give it a run, and you can see we get the same exact output. So we've basically gone through and checked against a condition for all of these elements in this list. Let's go through another example where instead of comparing to see if it's even, that example is used a lot. Let's say we have a list of favorite numbers, and we'll just put a few in here, such as 34 and 43 and 17. We could make a new list, fav list, and what we're going to do is we're going to grab the element, whatever you want to call it here. D is fine for D in data, if D in fav numbers. And then at the end, we will print fav list. All right, let's run this. And you can see we just get back the 34s, the 43s, and the 17. It maintains the same quantity of them. You can see we have 3 34s, 2 43s, and 1 17, but it ignores any of the other elements. So to summarize that tip, you can use list comprehension to filter through a large list and only take elements that meet some qualification. The next tip is pretty fun. If you want to flatten a list, or imagine if you have a list of lists, you can get them all into a single list using list comprehension. So this solution is going to be a little less friendly when it comes to reading, but we'll do our best. So we'll start with a list, student scores, and in here we're going to have 3 lists. And let's just say the scores are really simple: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What we're going to do is we are going to just say flat scores, and we are going to grab the score. Where is score going to come from? Let's imagine we just have one of these lists for a second. We're going to say for score in scores, where scores is a single list. But how do we get that single list? Well, we actually need another for here. So we're going to say for scores in student scores. So basically this first 4 will jump in from this outer list into one of these, where each iteration scores will point to one of these lists. This will be the first iteration, this will be the second iteration, this will be the third iteration. And then consider it a nested for is going to iterate through each element. 1, 2, 3, and then again 4, 5, 6, and then again 7, 8, 9. So I'm like 70% sure this is going to work. Let's give it a try. We'll print flat scores and run it to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now it doesn't have to be a perfect square, so we could go in here and add some data if we wanted to see how it works. And you can see works fine. However, it's not going to work immediately with nested lists. So if we have a list in here, you can see it's just going to include that entire list, which might work for some scenarios, but obviously this isn't going to traverse an infinite number of lists. The next tip I got for you is the ability to replace elements in a list with some value. So you don't want to remove them, you want to replace certain ones with a different value. So let's start off with a clean slate here. And let's say we have a list of memberships. And we're not talking like the categories gold, silver, bronze, but rather if you went through every customer and wrote down their membership. So you might have repeats. Gold, gold, bronze, silver. And, let's just say you were feeling nice and you decided that everybody is going to be able to join your gym or whatever subscription membership you're doing. So you created a free tier. Before this, at one point, you would just have null or none in Python. So you might have both of those values. So what would that look like? Well, you might have in here the free tier, and then you might have none, another free, bronze, silver, and then let's do another none. So what I want to do is I want to basically clean this data, replace all these nones with the new free tier. So this is not too bad, but there's a little gotcha that I'm going to call out in a minute. So we're going to say cleaned, and what are we going to do? We're going to grab the membership. Where is membership going to come from? For membership in memberships, and we want to do an if statement. If it's gold, bronze, or silver, or free, or in other words, if it's not none, we'll just keep the existing value, membership. Otherwise, we're going to make it free. Earlier, we did a condition over here on the end. However, when you want an else statement, you actually have to do it on the left. And this is probably what I would say is the most confusing thing when it comes to list comprehension, just the inconsistency there. But there's a reason for it, and we're actually using a ternary operator. So what does the ternary operator look like? A, if some condition is met, else B. So we'll basically say free if it's none, otherwise we'll just keep it as it is. So what that's going to look like is free if membership is none, else we'll make it whatever it was originally, which is membership. So wow, that's a lot. Free if membership is none, else membership, for every single membership inside of this memberships list. So when you read it like that, it's not too bad. Basically going to iterate through each one of these. If it's none, we're going to replace it with free. Let's go ahead and print cleaned. Run this, and we got gold, gold, bronze, silver, free, 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 bronze, silver, free. Seems to work. Now, because this is a ternary operator, you could put in parentheses if that makes it clearer to you. So it'll look like this. And basically this ternary operator is going to evaluate to one or the other. So it has to do with what value we put into the final list, and that's why it's all on the left-hand side. If you're filtering on the source values and you don't need to do any else's, then you can put that if over here on the right. So we should be able to run that and get the same result even with those parentheses. The next thing you can do with list comprehension is if you have a list or multiple lists, you can multiply them or get the product of these lists. So an example of this is if you go to an ice cream store and you can get 3 scoops of ice cream. Let's say they have chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla. Well, your 3 scoops could be chocolate, 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 or it could be chocolate, chocolate, strawberry, chocolate, chocolate, vanilla, or chocolate, strawberry, vanilla. You get the point. I'm not going to go through every possibility, but Python can do that for us using none other than list comprehension. That might have been a little over the top, but all right, so let's just say we have the flavors, and this is going to be a list. We're just going to use just characters just to make it really easy to read. So chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla. CSV, comma separated value? No, it's chocolate, strawberry, vanilla. So let's go ahead and make a cones, which is going to be a list containing all the possibilities. And you can imagine what this looks like for a second, where each combination is a list itself. So we could have C, C, and C. Next one could be C, C, and S, and so forth. So we have a nested list. So when we grab the element, we're going to actually surround it in square brackets. So it's going to look like this, where we have square brackets inside of the list comprehension. And these are going to be separated by commas, so we can just call them whatever. Scoop 1, scoop 2, and scoop 3. Where do these come from? Well, for scoop 1 in flavors, and because this is basically just triple nested loop, we're just going to do that again for scoop 2 in flavors, and then again for scoop 3 in flavors. This one took me a few moments to think about, so don't expect to just, sometimes pull these out of your brain, but maybe you'll have a better natural way of thinking about these. I was able to figure it out, and we were able to get the list. So I got chocolate, 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 strawberry, chocolate, chocolate, vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, chocolate, and so forth. So what about the total count? Well, we could print the length, and we'll see that there are 27 possibilities, which is just 3 times 3 times 3, as there's 3 elements, and we're getting all possibilities. So this setup shows that you can create lists inside a list comprehension for nested lists, but you can also just do a string. So I'm going to show you what that might look like. Let's go ahead and surround this with quotes, and we're going to do an F string, which will allow us to put some variables in here. So we can just have like 3 character combination code to describe the cone, which is going to be a lot prettier. We're still printing the length. Let's get rid of that, and we'll run it now. We can see everything a lot better. CCC, CCS, CCV, CSC, and so forth. The question is, which one would you choose? Drop it in the comments section below. The next thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to list comprehension is actually about set comprehension. You can create a set instead of a list by just replacing the square brackets with curly braces. The only difference between lists and sets really is that the sets cannot have repeating values. If you insert a value multiple times into a set, it's just going to have one of those values. But let's go ahead and try that out in our example. So we'll just go into our code, replace this with a curly brace, and replace this with a curly brace. And now we have a set of values. The total count in this situation is exactly the same because we don't have any repeating. However, you could see this difference a lot better if, say, these were all the same. Well, now we're only going to have one option. However, if we are working with a list comprehension, we would still get 27 of them. So basically for the set, we just put CCC in there over and over and over again 27 times, with the end result still being 1. So let's go ahead and put that back to a set, and that concludes our set comprehension section. Not much different than list comprehension. But wait, there's not only list comprehension and set comprehension, there's actually dictionary comprehension. This one is actually a little bit different because now not only do you have the value, but you have a key value pair. So we have to worry about 2 things for each item inside of the dictionary. Just to follow along with our example, let's go back, put this how it was, CSV. Let's say we wanted to associate what this character meant with its value. So C is tied to chocolate, S is tied to strawberry, and V is tied to vanilla. You could easily do this with a dictionary. So let's go ahead and replace this example. Since we're no longer just making ice cream cones, we're actually going to figure out what these values mean and make a cool dictionary. So we're going to call this something like flavor codes. Obviously, this is a fairly simple example, but it illustrates the possibility to associate different things. So we'll have flavor names, and this is going to be the strings. So we'll have chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla. For the flavor codes, this is going to be the dictionary, and what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of using square brackets, use curly braces again, but we're going to have a key and a value. So the key can be the flavor, such as C, and then a colon to associate it to a value, which can be the name. So we're going to have a flavor and a name. Where do these come from? We'll say for flavor, comma, name, in, and then we say which data structure we want to grab it from. But we have a problem here. You see, one of the values comes from flavors and one comes from the flavor names. So there's actually a function in Python to grab both of these, and that is the zip function. So we'll say flavors and flavor names, like so. And we no longer have cones, so we'll just print the flavor codes. Run this, and you can see C is chocolate, S is strawberry, and V is vanilla. So when we say .get and pass in some code such as V, we can figure out that that's vanilla. Pretty complex, but totally worth everything to be able to figure out these different mysterious flavors. Now there is another simple way to do this same thing inside of Python. So you don't have to use this dictionary comprehension. You can just use this zip here. So if I took this zip, brought it down here, and I'll just make a new one just called simple, pasted zip of flavors and flavor names, and then all we have to do is pass it to the dict constructor. We'll save that and we'll print out simple, and we will see that we get the same exact result. So obviously there's like a million ways of doing everything in programming, so it's not really a big deal if there's multiple ways of doing something. So which one of these would you want to do? Well, in the majority of cases, I think just doing the zip and then casting it to a dictionary is going to work great, but it prevents you from being detailed in any kind of conditions or any of those other features that come with dictionary comprehension. So an example is if we wanted a condition here, if name is not equal to chocolate. Well, that's going to skip chocolate altogether. So our flavor codes is now going to only be strawberry and vanilla. It's a lot harder to do something like that with this here. So if you're going to do something a little bit more complex, you need more control, then you could do the dictionary comprehension. If you're just going to combine two lists into a dictionary, well, then keep it simple. Just use zip and then cast it to a dictionary. My next tip is you can actually use dictionary comprehension to flip the key and the value. One potential issue here is that you can't have repeating key values. So if your values are often repeated, if you had two of the same values, then when you switch them over, you might have some data loss. But in this situation, we don't have any repeating keys or values, so it'll work great. So let's go ahead and try to flip the CSV to be the values and the chocolate, strawberry, vanilla to be the keys. Since we're building the dictionary now, we could just, flip name and flavor right here. But let's just say we were given this flavor codes dictionary and we didn't have any of this earlier code. All we have is flavor codes, and we are requested to flip the keys and the values. You could say flipped, and we're going to create a dictionary, and we are going to say value key, which these are just variables, but basically we can visualize the key being on the right side and the value being on the left. Feel free to name them whatever you want, such as flavor and flavor name, whatever. Where do these come from? We'll say for, and then key, comma, value in flavor codes. Oh, we also have to say dot items, which is how you can iterate through a dictionary and grab the key and value. So we're just going to iterate through and then flip it around for this new dictionary. So let's go ahead and print flipped, run it, and you can see strawberry is S and vanilla is V. We still don't have chocolate because we have this condition. We can get rid of this. There we go. And there we go. So here's the original one. This is the flavor codes we were given, and here is the flipped version down here. If by just say chance you had two of the same values, chocolate, here's what's going to happen. When you run it, the end result is you're only going to have that key in there a single time, and the S replaced the C. So that's what the value is for chocolate. So yeah, you might just need to do a little bit of checking or being really careful on what you flip when it comes to dictionaries. In the first example, you can have chocolate for the value repeating because that's totally fine in dictionaries. Only the key cannot be repeating. So the key is unique, values are not unique. My final tip is you can actually work with tuples inside a list comprehension. So let's say you were given a list of tuples with, in a similar to dictionary, like key value, but instead is just comma separated. We could flip those and give a new list of tuples. So let's go through an example of that to finish off the video. Let's say we have a list of users and each one is a tuple with their name and their user ID. There's the first one. We'll just make a few more here. Doesn't really matter what the values are, just kind of making stuff up. So far, so good. If we wanted to flip these values, we could say flipped. We're going to make a new list. We can create a tuple for the element with parentheses inside of here. And say you were given a tuple, such as this here, you can grab the second element by saying user and then in square brackets passing in index 1. Similarly, we could grab the first element here, so it's comma separated for a tuple, so user index 0 for user and users. And then we'll go ahead and print flipped. Run that, and you can see now the user ID comes first. So if you prefer to have the ID first, you can do it that way. This allows us to be pretty specific on what we want to do. So for example, we could capitalize the first name, capitalize, that's a method, and we'll run that, and you can see it now capitalizes the first letter of each word. If you don't need that customization, then there's an easier way to flip a tuple. What you'll do is you'll just say user, and notice I got rid of the parentheses because now when we refer to user, it's already a tuple, and then inside of square brackets, colon, -1 in a similar way to how we flipped the strings. So you can look up slicing to understand how that is, but basically putting a -1 at the end is going to reverse the elements. Run it, and you can see we get the same result. Just now we cannot capitalize or do anything specific as we are doing this list comprehension. Hopefully by now you can see some of the different things you can do with list comprehension. Pretty confusing if you're new, but once you go through a bunch of examples, like when I built out these examples, it helps a lot. So hopefully now that you've gone through this video and you followed along, you have a better understanding. If you want to know more with Python development, specifically if you want to do some more advanced stuff like backend development, web development, then check out the notes for my upcoming course. I'm giving them out for free. So if you want early access to those, they're in development, constantly being updated. I'll leave a pinned comment down below. Let me know if there's anything that could have been done easier, if there's any other tips and tricks for list comprehension. Don't forget to leave your favorite configuration for your ice cream cone if you had 3 scoops. Drop that in the comment section below as well. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for supporting this channel. And hopefully this got you going in the right direction. Thank you for watching. Peace out.